Moscow and Pyongyang are once again playing with the nerves of the North Atlantic Alliance. According to the latest information, which mainly comes from Western sources, North Korean soldiers have reportedly returned to the front of the special military operation. And not only that, but they have been seen actively participating in the fighting in the key direction. At this very moment, Russia has managed to advance in a single day toward two very important towns at the same time. We're discussing advances that could instantly alter the course of the special military operation, putting the armed forces of Ukraine in check and therefore NATO itself. But above all, we're also talking about that organization's greatest fear. The friends of the Russian Federation are already actively taking action, while those of Ukraine, what exactly are they doing? So, while territory on the Ukrainian front is being lost, endless meetings are taking place in the offices of Brussels. NATO is facing the threat of the Russian-North Korean alliance, which is becoming more and more evident, more effective. What does it consist of? In what terms and geographical positions is it developing? What real threat does it pose to the adversaries of the Russian Federation? We're going to look at all of this in today's report. Stay until the end of this video, because there we'll see how the participation of the North Korean army in the fighting in Ukraine is not just a simple victory for the Russian Federation, but in fact, at the very least, a double victory for that country and a very significant defeat for NATO, especially in terms of foreign mobilization. I'm Liu Sivaya, war correspondent in Donbass and geopolitical analyst. Subscribe to this channel to stay up to date with the latest international news and, of course, the Ukrainian conflict as well. Let's get started. We'll begin as usual from the very beginning. Lately, more and more information has been appearing about the presence of North Korean soldiers on the battlefield directly in Ukraine. Previously, people discussed the special military operations territory more generally. Unofficially, that is, these North Korean soldiers were positioned in the Kursk region. This was consistently and repeatedly denied. The Russian Federation didn't comment until it was confirmed. How did that happen? With Vladimir Putin himself thanking Kim Jong-un, thanking him for his participation, thanking him for the soldiers in the Kursk operation.
Thanking him for the initiative. As it's very clear, his special team participated in the liberation of Kursk.
I want to note that his soldiers fought with bravery and heroism. I want to note that we will never forget the deaf who joined their armed forces.
The families of his Marine soldiers. I want to thank you on behalf of the people of Russia for your participation in this struggle. Oof.
In fact, the work in Kursk, far from being finished for the North Korean formations, is still ongoing. And here, Western sources report again that they have recently been sent to the front. They say Ukraine, but actually it seems the vast majority went specifically to the Kursk region. About 5,000 North Korean soldiers, as well as around 1,000 engineers who would mainly be dedicated to demining tasks. On the ground, this situation is indeed confirmed, especially for you, properly translated and subtitled by my team. North Korean soldiers, indeed serving in the Kursk region.
Only then on the way. We're heading out on a combat mission with the Korean People's Army servicemen for a full day of demining.
In Kursk, they explained, since the information ended with confirmation, at one point even from the Russian Federation, in my personal Telegram communication, members of this same channel, we were talking about it, and I warned you about this. I believe that absolutely before anyone else, and in fact, we even analyzed it quite thoroughly. But now, the new information, which I have to emphasize here, mainly comes from the intelligence services of South Korea, which is precisely the country that has the most control on the ground. Military intelligence control, I hope I'm clear. I'm referring to Livan, not North Korea. A long history of confrontations between both countries, and the agents from both sides, indeed, operate very well in each other's territory simultaneously. These same South Korean intelligence agents therefore would have warned the majority of the world that North Korean soldiers were once again heading toward the front of the Russian Federation. But this time, they were going directly to the territory of the special military operation, especially citing one of the key fronts at this very moment, where Russia is making great strides, especially compared to previous advances. Here, of course, we are talking about the Zaporozhye direction, which could absolutely change everything within the course of the special military operation. The presence of North Korean soldiers in that region for now cannot be officially confirmed or denied. That, of course, does not rule out the possibility. I hope my message is understood clearly. At some point, the Russian Federation might end up thanking Kim Jong-un for his support in the liberation of the Russian region of Zaporozhye as well. This, in fact, is one of the key points of the matter. On one hand, we have NATO denouncing the increasingly growing and therefore increasingly dangerous partnership for the North Atlantic Alliance between Russia and other countries, both those that are part of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and those that are not. In this very particular case, China, and of course, North Korea. Well, let's listen to the Secretary General.
Russia's proposed change won't end once it becomes possible. For the foreseeable future, Russia will remain a destabilizing force in Europe and in the world. And Russia is not alone in its efforts to dismantle global rules. As you know, it is working with China, Korea, Iran, and others. They are increasing their defense and industrial collaboration to unprecedented levels. Are they preparing for a confrontation? We can't be naive. We must be prepared.
In-depth analysis has been carried out from this very channel, and we're going to reveal some key facts at the end of this video. The scandal of North Korean involvement. So, what exactly would it be? Well, in theory, if North Korea participates on Russia's side in what NATO considers its own war against Ukraine, then that country would be almost declaring war on Ukraine itself. And therefore, NATO doesn't want to acknowledge it. But to the very North Atlantic Alliance itself, which indeed is leading the way in the Ukrainian conflict. However, on the part of the Russian Federation, the matter is very well settled legally. On one hand, there is the recent cooperation treaty at all levels, including the military that Russia and North Korea signed, which obliges both countries to enter into combat if their partners already involved. Furthermore, we are actually talking about territory that belongs to the Russian Federation. On one hand, when it came to the Kursk region, this was absolutely obvious since the territory of that region was recognized as Russian, even by the North Atlantic Alliance itself. But in the case of Zaporozhye, this would not be any different either, since Russia has already included this region in its constitution. And what does NATO say? Honestly, they don't care. The people have already spoken. Therefore, Zaporozhye is a Russian area. So there shouldn't be any obstacle for North Korean soldiers who are allies of the Russian Federation to help fully liberate it. This issue, that is the very likely participation of the North Korean army in combat in Ukraine, it stings, and a lot, both in Ukraine itself and, of course, in NATO for several reasons. First of all, this has to do with what is happening right now on the battlefield. Namely, in Zaporizhzhia, the most important advances are taking place in two key directions at the same time. On one hand, the Russian Federation. Right now, it is about 3 kilometers from Eryhav, and according to some sources, fighting is already beginning on the outskirts of that town. On the other hand, the same situation is happening in the town of Guliapol. That is, Russia is encircling a significant number of enemy troops in the region's territory. From Zaporozhye and approaching from two directions at once to the capital of that region, which is the city of Zaporozhye. With its liberation, the special military operation on this particular front would most likely come to an end, which without a doubt would be, at the very least, a major setback for the armed forces of Ukraine and therefore for the entire North Atlantic Alliance. Not to mention the fact that the latest Russian advances, and possibly also North Korean, are taking place in Zaporozhye. They are happening thanks to the constant fall and retreat, therefore, of enemy soldiers. This is happening in a rather chaotic way because the Ukrainian defense simply can't hold out any longer. Also, at a certain point, with every step Russia takes from Guliapol, it will encounter fewer and fewer fortifications. Since Ukrainian corruption also has quite a lot to do with this, it's unclear where the NATO funds for defensive positions actually went, or whose pockets it ended up in. On the other hand, this is also a fundamental victory in diplomatic terms, and you could even say in media terms, in terms of international image, if you will. And that's because, meanwhile, the Russian Federation has an increasing number of allies directly involved in the matters that are most important to that country. What does Ukraine have? A lot of good wishes, many meetings in Brussels, the best of intentions. When it comes to helping, yes, economic aid, yes, military aid. But let's not forget, much of it ends up elsewhere. Actually, it's going into the pockets of Ukrainian and European politicians. So it doesn't even reach or help, therefore, either the front lines or the general situation in the country. But the key resource in a war, and in this conflict in particular, we've seen this principle confirmed more than once. It continues to be the men, without whom Ukraine is constantly running out. There are too many desertions. This isn't just my view, but Ukrainian sources say so, repeatedly noting desertions outnumber new recruits, most of whom are forcibly mobilized. On the other hand, the Russian Federation has infinitely fewer desertions. This isn't even a problem at the front. And also, at a rate of between 30 and 40,000 men every month. If we add to this the North Korean soldiers who go to the Ukrainian front, which seems to happen every month or so, NATO has very serious reasons to feel increasingly annoyed and increasingly threatened. Because Russia not only gets the image of a country that is effectively, massively, and very actively supported by its own people, but it also receives real support, which in the long run, as we all know, will eventually guarantee its victory. Of course, we shouldn't forget about our own part here either. North Korea, Russia, clearly benefits, but does North Korea gain anything? Of course it does. First of all, from this point on, it already has real experience, both on the battlefield and in a modern war. In the most modern of all wars, and also the most massive one experienced since World War II. They are in contact with the latest technology. They are gaining military experience by the bucket load, but they are also directly learning about the strategies and therefore the weaknesses of NATO. Therefore, the constant deployment of North Korean troops to the Russian front can be explained in a very simple and logical way. The first group leaves, arrives in Russia, and those who survive gain the necessary experience, because honestly, we have to admit that many of them end up dying in combat. Their families, however, receive many social rewards, and this ensures them a higher standard of living, which, as we all know, is very important in North Korea, especially nowadays. They return to their home country and use this experience to become instructors, to teach everything they have learned, to train more and better cadres each time. But the war moves forward, technology advances, and strategy also evolves. Of NATO. So in order to keep up with that, at least in a parallel way, and even try to get ahead in some areas, what you have to do is be there on the battlefield consistently. So that's where the next group has to go, and the next one, and the next one. But this gives North Korea an unparalleled advantage. It gains international standing, a reputation as a country that really doesn't mess around, a key partner at all levels, a well-trained army capable of facing NATO itself, because in fact it has already been doing so in the territory of the special military operation. On the other hand, and here we come to the key point of all this. The participation of the North Korean army in the special military operation actually means a double victory for the Russian Federation, especially if we add this first piece of information to the second, which comes directly from Ukraine. And what does it have to do with the Foreign Legion or the Foreign Corps, as you prefer, which until recently used to operate in the territory of that country, according to sources, which in fact mostly come from Ukraine itself? There are about 1,000 fighters left today who will no longer fight within that Foreign Legion, which Ukraine is going to give up in the very near future. And from this moment on, they will be directly under the command of the Ukrainian army and therefore will fight as just another Ukrainian soldier. This is due to the extremely severe and enormous losses that this legion has been suffering in Ukrainian territory on a constant basis. And this is precisely where we reach the most dangerous conclusion, both for Ukraine and for NATO, due to the actions of the Russian Federation in different areas. That includes the military, diplomatic, economic, and political aspects. Of course, that country has not only gained reliable partners who are committed to supporting it effectively in every way and at all levels. Take, for example, the participation of North Korea alongside the Russian Federation on the battlefield, side by side, Russian soldiers and North Korean soldiers. There's absolutely nothing like this cooperation on the opposing side. On the other hand, these same actions by the Russian Federation constantly attacking the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, which, as we've always said, foreigners are a very easy target. They stand out in every single town. Every town they set foot in, they end up attracting attention, even if it's just because of their skin tone. Of course, the agents of the Russian Federation on the ground are also working. Russian military intelligence doesn't sleep, and so the attacks were becoming more and more intense. This must be added, the shortage of troops on the Ukrainian side. So these soldiers, who are mainly Colombians, were increasingly being used as pure cannon fodder. This has already become absolutely obvious. In fact, there are already countless messages from these foreign mercenaries asking for help to get out of the Ukrainian front, whether it's their mother or their president.
They were left alone in a war against a giant that out of necessity they can't find, death.
Of our lives, because we don't want to work anymore with
it. Of course, they expose Ukraine itself and greatly diminish the willingness of other potential volunteers to join that country's army. Therefore, the victory of the Russian Federation becomes twofold in terms of this foreign participation in the Ukrainian conflict. In general terms, on one hand, it manages to strengthen its own positions with support and foreign aid from friends, almost more than foreign partners, while on the other hand, it manages to greatly weaken the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in terms of this same collaboration with foreign units. I nearly forgot a crucial detail. We are talking about the latest advances by Russia and possibly also North Korea on the front in the Perosia region. In this regard, now there is also talk about North Korean soldiers being present in the territory of the special military operation to somehow explain the constant defeats on this same front by Ukraine, above all, therefore. So this narrative is being used, of course, also by the Ukrainian military themselves, especially those of high rank, to try to explain. Even if it's just to explain their failures on the battlefield, it's not our fault. It's that Russia keeps bringing in allies, making any victory impossible for us, as we'd say in Russia. A bad dancer is bothered even by his own balls. In short, Russia and its allies once again prove that the new multipolar world order really does work much better. In a much more equal and fair way, And above all, it is based on facts and not on words. And on the other hand, we have whistleblowers assuming such collaboration with the opposing side, that is, with Ukraine and its allies, which, generally speaking, all they can do is keep coming up with eye-catching headlines. Because actions from those who call themselves Ukraine's best friends and most strategic partners, for some reason, are rather few and far between.